Mythology is a vast ocean of narratives that, in some ways, teach us about the human condition. Some stories, however, delve into deeper, darker waters, addressing issues that many would rather avoid: death, suffering, and the fragility of life. For many ancient civilizations, death was not an end but a transition. For example, the ancient Egyptians believed in the soul's journey to the afterlife, where it would face trials and challenges before reaching eternal life. This idea that death is just a passage teaches us to respect and value the moments we have. In addition, mythologies such as Greek and Norse are full of narratives that explore human suffering. Consider Prometheus, who was severely punished for defying the gods by bringing fire to humanity. This story not only reflects the consequences of our actions, but also the constant struggle between the human desire for progress and the resistance of the forces that seek to maintain order. As I reflect on these stories, I realize how they connect us to something greater, to an ancient wisdom that speaks to the challenges we all face. It is interesting to note how, even in modern times, these narratives continue to resonate. Films, books, and even songs draw inspiration from these dark stories to explore the dilemmas of contemporary life. Mythology, then, is not just a reliquary of ancient stories. It is a source of reflection on our own fears, hopes, and the inevitability of fate. By encountering these dark themes, we are invited to face our own shadows and find meaning amidst the chaos. Thus, when we delve into dark mythologies, we are not just exploring a distant world. We are, in fact, reflecting on our experiences, our fears, and the search for understanding in a universe that often seems indifferent. The beauty of these stories is that, despite their dark themes, they also offer us a light, a path to understanding that, in the end, suffering can be a valuable teacher. This collective learning connects us to past generations, showing that, regardless of time, the issues we face remain timeless and universal. I invite you, dear reader, to explore these narratives with an open mind. In doing so, you may find not only answers, but also the courage to face your own shadows. Recognizing that, like the heroes of old, each of us has a journey to follow. Mythology teaches us that, although life is full of challenges, it is also a space for learning, growth, and, inevitably, transformation. The mythologies of various cultures have in common the presence of gods who are not limited to being benevolent and protective figures. In fact, many of them act as antagonists, bringing chaos and misfortune to mortals. These gods, often portrayed as capricious or even evil, reflect dark aspects of the human condition and reveal a universal truth. Life is not only made up of light and blessings, but also of challenges and suffering. When I look at these stories, I realize that they teach us about the duality of existence. For example, in Greek mythology, we have Hades, the god of the underworld. Although he is often seen as a villain, his role is essential. He not only rules over the souls of the dead, but is also a guardian of the balance between life and death. His figure reminds us that the end of life is a natural part of the cycle, and that death, although feared, is a reality that we must all face. Another fascinating example is Loki, from Norse mythology. He is a god who embodies chaos and trickery. Although he sometimes helps the gods, his role is often to instigate conflict and disorder. This complexity invites reflection. Life is full of situations in which the people we love can disappoint us, and Loki's presence in the stories reminds us that betrayal and disloyalty are inevitable parts of human relationships. These antagonistic gods also reveal truths about ourselves. They force us to confront our fears and insecurities. Instead of running away from these emotions, we should embrace them as part of our journey. When faced with hardship, it is common to feel like we are being punished by forces beyond our control. However, these mythological figures teach us that adversity can be an opportunity for personal and spiritual growth. In addition, the stories of antagonist gods are a reflection of the struggles we face in society. In many cultures, these gods represent oppressive forces, such as war, famine, and disease. Through them, it is possible to discuss social and moral issues, bringing to light the struggle between good and evil, justice and injustice. This narrative is timeless and continues to resonate in our day, where we feel small in the face of powers that seem to dominate our lives. If we look at the tales of gods like Kali from Hindu mythology, we see a figure who, despite her terrifying appearance, is also a symbol of transformation. She destroys what is negative and obsolete to make room for the new. This duality is a powerful lesson. We often need to go through painful processes to achieve renewal and growth. In short, the antagonist gods in mythologies are not mere villains. They are mirrors of our own struggles and desires. They help us explore the complexity of life and the importance of facing our fears. By understanding their stories, we can find strength to face our own battles, recognizing that even in the shadows, there is room for light and transformation. This is the wisdom that mythology offers us, if we are willing to look beyond the surface. Sacrifices and rituals in the mythologies of different cultures are themes that arouse both fascination and repulsion. Since ancient times, humanity has sought ways to connect with the divine, and this often involved practices that today may seem strange or even disturbing. The main objective of these rituals was to appease gods and ensure the prosperity of communities. When we read about these practices, it is important to remember that they were seen as fundamental to the survival and well-being of people. In many cultures, sacrifices were not limited to animal offerings. In some traditions, the offering could include grains, fruits, and even precious objects. What was important was the intention behind the act. I always wonder how these communities managed to maintain their faith in rituals that, to us, may seem extreme. I imagine that the belief in the efficacy of these acts provided a sense of security and control in a world full of uncertainty. The rain that did not come, the crops that failed, and the diseases that appeared were situations that generated despair. Thus, rituals became a way of trying to recover what had been lost. A fascinating example is the cult of fertility gods, where sacrifices were performed to ensure good harvests. In some ancient cultures, priests performed elaborate ceremonies where dancing and chanting were accompanied by offerings. These practices created an atmosphere of communion between humans and the divine. I believe that, although many of these traditions have been lost or transformed over the centuries, the essence of the search for connection remains alive. In addition to agricultural practices, many rituals were linked to war and protection. Sacrifices were performed before battles as a way of seeking the blessing of the gods. The idea was that by offering something valuable, warriors could ensure victory and the safety of their people. I can only imagine the weight this placed on those who participated in these rituals, a responsibility that went beyond the individual, involving the collective. Another intriguing aspect is the role of priests and priestesses, who were the intermediaries between mortals and the gods. These individuals often held great power and prestige, but they also faced an immense burden. They were responsible for ensuring that the rituals were performed correctly, as a mistake could mean divine wrath. The pressure on these figures is something that makes me reflect on the importance of spirituality and traditions in our lives. Today, when we look at these practices, it is essential to remember that they reflected an understanding of the world that was different from our own. Relationships with the gods were based on a system of exchange. Communities offered something in exchange for protection, prosperity, and guidance. So even if we no longer practice these rituals, the search for spiritual connection is still an important part of the human experience. In short, sacrifices and rituals in mythologies reveal a lot about the human condition and the need for belonging and protection. They show us that, regardless of time and culture, the search for meaning and connection with something greater is an intrinsic desire of our existence. It is fascinating how these ancient customs still resonate in our search for answers and understanding of the world around us. Legends from many cultures are full of monstrous creatures that reflect human fears and anxieties. When we speak of monsters, we are not just referring to hideous beings that inhabit dark forests or deep caves. These figures often symbolize deeper aspects of the human psyche, representing our most primitive fears and insecurities. Throughout history, societies have created these creatures to explain the inexplicable and give form to their anxieties. A classic example is dragons, which appear in mythologies from all over the world. In Western culture, they are often seen as evil creatures that guard treasures and represent immense challenges for heroes to overcome. However, in many Eastern cultures, these same dragons are revered as symbols of wisdom and power, and are associated with water and fertility. This duality shows us that what may be considered monstrous in one culture may be seen as sacred in another. This diversity of perspectives makes me reflect on how our own fears can be shaped by the culture in which we live. Another fascinating creature is the chimera, a being that combines parts of different animals. In Greek mythology, the chimera is a combination of a lion, a goat, and a serpent, symbolizing the mixing of unequal forces. The chimera represents the fear of the unknown and the internal struggle that we all face when dealing with our own weaknesses and imperfections. When I look at the chimera, I see a powerful metaphor. We all carry within us a chimera, a combination of virtues and flaws that make us unique. In Norse mythology, we find giants, who represent the forces of nature and the challenges it imposes. They are often opposed to the gods, symbolizing the constant struggle between order and chaos. This battle teaches us that life is made up of conflicts and that we often need to face our personal giants, which can be fears, insecurities, or even adverse situations. The fight against these giants thus becomes a journey of self-discovery and growth. In addition, creatures such as vampires and werewolves in popular traditions have their roots in social and existential fears. They represent the struggle against primitive instinct, the seduction of the forbidden, and the fear of losing control. When I think about these creatures, I realize that they are not just monsters in stories, but also reflections of our internal struggles and moral dilemmas. These monstrous creatures are not just figurines from fairy tales or horror stories, but rather representations of the challenges we face in our own lives. They encourage us to confront our fears and understand that each of us has a part of the monster within us. By exploring these myths, we are invited to reflect on our own nature and find a path to self-understanding. Therefore, when delving into the world of monstrous creatures in mythology, we should not simply fear them or admire their stories. Instead, we should learn from them, recognizing that often the greatest battles we face are within ourselves. Each monster can be a lesson, an invitation to reflection and personal transformation. Last but not least, the cultural legacy of mythologies teaches us about morality and ethics. Stories often contain valuable lessons about the human condition, exploring the consequences of actions and choices. By reflecting on these narratives, we are invited to examine our own lives and consider how our decisions shape our destiny. In short, the cultural legacy of mythologies is a treasure that continues to enrich our lives. It connects us to the past, offers us important lessons, and inspires us to tell our own stories. By exploring these dark and intriguing secrets, we are reminded that mythology is not just a collection of ancient stories, but a vital part of our cultural and spiritual identity.